When the distress signal reached the human outpost, it was already too late for most. The far-flung world of Veldar, nestled on the outskirts of the galaxy, had been under siege for weeks. The inhabitants, an alliance of minor alien species, had held out as long as they could, but their defenses were crumbling. The Krylan were one of the most feared species in the galaxy, not because of their size or numbers, but due to their unwavering pursuit of dominance. Their reputation spread across star systems as ruthless conquerors, a race with no regard for diplomacy or peaceful coexistence. For the Krylan, strength was the ultimate currency, and in their eyes, only the strongest had the right to exist. If a world did not submit immediately to their rule, it was destined to burn. Physically, the Krylan were imposing. Standing taller than most humanoid species, they possessed a rigid, exoskeleton-like armor that covered their sinewy bodies, making them nearly impervious to conventional weapons. Their skin, a deep, obsidian black, shimmered under the light of distant suns, while their eyes, cold and calculating, glowed a piercing yellow, always scanning for weaknesses. But what made the Krylan truly terrifying was their ability to adapt. Through centuries of evolution, their biology had fine-tuned them into perfect predators, designed to survive and thrive in hostile environments. Their muscular limbs ended in razor-sharp claws capable of slicing through metal, and their enhanced senses made it nearly impossible to surprise them on the battlefield. However, it wasn't just their physical attributes that set them apart. The Krylan were masters of strategy, with a hierarchical society that valued cunning as much as brute strength. Their warlords were revered not only for their combat prowess, but for their strategic genius. Every invasion they launched was meticulously planned, and they exploited the weaknesses of their enemies with ruthless efficiency. They studied their foes, learning their habits, exploiting their cultural or political divisions, and attacking where it hurt the most. To the Krylan, war was a game of domination, and they played to win, no matter the cost. Their culture was built around conquest. From birth, Krylan children were trained in the art of war. Weakness was not tolerated, and those who failed to meet the rigid standards of their society were cast out or used as fodder for battle. The Krylan held no allegiances outside their own race. Alliances with other species were unheard of, for they viewed other beings as inferior. Any civilization that refused to kneel before them was deemed unworthy and marked for destruction. The Krylan did not wage war for resources, survival, or expansion alone. They fought to enforce their belief that the galaxy belonged to the strong, and to them, no one was stronger than the Krylan. Their fleets were a testament to this belief, massive armadas designed to intimidate and obliterate. Each ship in their fleet was heavily armored, equipped with advanced weaponry that could tear through planetary defenses with ease. They attacked with overwhelming force, leaving no chance for negotiation or surrender. Despite their militaristic nature, the Krylan were not mindless brutes. They were a highly intelligent race, capable of developing advanced technologies that rivaled even the most sophisticated civilizations in the galaxy. Their scientists constantly pushed the boundaries of what was possible, creating devastating weapons and impenetrable shields that made them a nearly unstoppable force. Their approach to technology mirrored their philosophy. It was a tool for domination, a means to assert their supremacy over others. Yet, for all their might, the Krylan had one fatal flaw: arrogance. Their belief in their own superiority often led them to underestimate their opponents, particularly those they deemed weaker. They had wiped out countless civilizations without much effort, and their hubris made them blind to the fact that there were races capable of defying them, not through raw power, but through ingenuity, resilience, and the ability to fight on multiple fronts. This arrogance would ultimately lead them into conflict with humanity, a species they had dismissed as insignificant until it was too late. The Krylan's drive for dominance was their strength, but also their downfall. They were relentless in their pursuit of control, yet their failure to understand the power of adaptation, teamwork, and the unpredictability of human nature would prove to be their undoing. And when they encountered the deadliest humans who answered the call for rescue, the Krylan would learn a harsh lesson that dominance isn't just about strength. It's about survival, and sometimes the smallest flame burns the brightest in the darkest times. The Galactic Council, fearing the Krylan's aggression might spread, had sent several delegations and reinforcements, but all had failed. Desperation was setting in, and rumors of Veldar's inevitable fall circulated through the stars. Yet one last call for help was sent, this time to humans. Humans had always been an enigma to the Galactic Council. In many corners of the galaxy, they were admired for their ingenuity and strength, while others feared their unpredictability. But what no one could deny was their relentless spirit, their unwillingness to back down from a fight, especially when the odds were against them. Among the humans, there was a group that was rarely called upon, a group so feared and revered that their involvement meant the situation had reached its darkest hour. They were the elite operatives, a coalition of soldiers, scientists, and strategists, each handpicked for their lethal skills. When the call for help came from Veldar, it was these deadliest humans who answered. As the human warship Tempest cut through the black void of space, Captain Zora Rook leaned back in her seat, eyes scanning the star map in front of her. The Krylan fleet was massive, far larger than any they'd faced in recent years. But size had never intimidated her. She glanced at her crew, a motley collection of hardened veterans and unconventional thinkers. "How long until we reach Veldar?" she asked, her voice steady. "ETA is 5 hours, Captain," replied Lieutenant Reyes, their navigation officer. Zara nodded, her mind already formulating a plan. They had been briefed on the Krylan, brutal warriors with a penchant for overwhelming their enemies through sheer numbers. But the humans had something the Krylan didn't understand: adaptability, and Captain Rook intended to make full use of that. The Tempest arrived in Veldar's orbit to a scene of devastation. Below them, the cities burned, and the defensive lines that had once held the Krylan at bay were shattered. Krylan ships patrolled the skies, hunting down the last remnants of resistance. "Begin orbital scans," Rook ordered. As data streamed onto the monitors, it was clear that the Krylan had taken control of key locations. Yet there were pockets of survivors, huddled in underground bunkers, their hope fading with each passing hour. Zora clenched her jaw. "Commander Valen," she called. The tall, stoic warrior stepped forward. Valen was not just any soldier. He was a legend in human combat circles. Trained in tactics that would make even the most hardened Krylan shiver, he was the best at what he did. "We'll need a strike team on the ground," Rook said, meeting his gaze. "You're leading." Valen gave a firm nod. "I'll take the squad down and secure the survivors." The drop ships descended through the thick, smoke-choked skies of Veldar, their hulls streaked with the orange glow of the atmosphere. Krylan ships buzzed overhead, patrolling the shattered remains of what had once been a bustling city. Below, the streets lay in ruins, scorched buildings reduced to skeletal frameworks, with ash swirling in the air like a death shroud. Commander Valen stood at the open hatch of the lead dropship, his eyes scanning the devastation below. His combat suit, a sleek black exoskeleton enhanced with adaptive cloaking technology, shimmered slightly as the dropships dodged through the skyscrapers. Beside him, his team, each one a veteran of countless battles, sat in tense silence, their weapons primed for the fight ahead. The Krylan were already on the ground, sweeping the streets with ruthless efficiency. Their patrols moved in tight formations, eyes glowing eerily through the smoke, their sharp claws glinting in the dim light as they hunted for the last remnants of resistance. As the dropships touched down in the shadows of a crumbling tower, Valen signaled for his team to move out. They disembarked in practiced silence, their boots making almost no sound against the cracked concrete. Krylan patrols were close, too close, but they hadn't yet spotted the humans. That was about to change. Valen led the charge, his sharp gaze scanning the area as he moved with the predatory grace of a seasoned warrior. His tactical visor fed him real-time data, enemy positions, points of entry, and potential weaknesses in the Krylan formations. "We move fast and hit hard," Valen said quietly into his comms. No mistakes. The first engagement. The first Krylan patrol appeared around the corner of a collapsed building, 5 soldiers in total. They didn't see the humans until it was too late. Valen's team struck with surgical precision, each operative targeting a Krylan soldier with deadly accuracy. Silenced plasma rifles hissed softly in the smoke-filled air, and the Krylan fell before they even had a chance to draw their weapons. Their bodies crumpled, claws twitching as their yellow eyes dimmed. "Clear," Valen muttered. The team moved on, slipping through the shadows like ghosts. The Krylan had never faced anything like this. In most battles, their overwhelming numbers and brute force had been more than enough to crush their enemies. But humans fought differently. Valen's team wasn't interested in meeting the Krylan head-on. They were striking from the shadows, picking off their enemies one by one, exploiting gaps in the Krylan's rigid, overconfident strategy. A growing resistance. As they advanced deeper into the city, the humans found themselves navigating a maze of destruction, shattered buildings, burning vehicles, and the skeletal remains of what had once been the Veldar's most vibrant district. Valen's team moved quickly, taking down isolated Krylan patrols with quiet efficiency, leaving nothing but empty streets in their wake. They approached the coordinates of one of the largest survivor bunkers. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than a collapsed structure, but Valen's scanners picked up signs of life below. Civilians were holed up inside, a mix of alien species and what was left of Veldar's militia. The Krylan were closing in on them, oblivious to the fact that their own doom was creeping up behind them. "Reyes, bring up the recon drones," Valen ordered. Within seconds, the team's recon drones were in the air, sweeping over the area. The data streamed onto Valen's HUD. Krylan forces were converging on the bunker in two directions. Time was running out. "Captain, we've located the survivors." Valen keyed into his comms. "They're trapped and Krylan forces are closing in. We'll extract them, but we need orbital support for the next phase." "Copy that," Captain Rook replied, her voice calm and steady. "Extraction teams are on standby. Get them out of there, and we'll provide cover when you make your move." Valen motioned to his team. "We split into two units. We cut off the Krylan, sweep their flanks, and open a path for the survivors. Reyes, you and your squad take the left. I'll lead the right. Move fast." The assault. The Krylan never saw it coming. As their forces prepared to breach the bunker, Valen's team struck. From the ruins of the surrounding buildings, the humans launched their attack, catching the Krylan in a deadly crossfire. Plasma bolts hissed through the air, lighting up the smoke-filled sky with flashes of blue and green. Valen led the charge on the right flank, his rifle spitting bursts of plasma as he tore through the Krylan ranks. His exosuit's adaptive cloaking shimmered, making him a near-invisible blur as he darted between cover, firing with deadly precision. The Krylan, taken off guard by the sudden assault, scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The humans were already among them, striking like predators on the hunt. To the Krylan, the humans seemed like shadows, impossible to pin down. They fired back, their weapons flashing with red beams, but their shots hit nothing but air. Valen's team moved too quickly, too efficiently, picking off the Krylan one by one. The enemy force was crumbling. "Keep up the pressure," Valen barked over the comms. "Don't give them time to regroup." On the left flank, Rice and his squad moved with equal precision, clearing out the Krylan with brutal efficiency. Grenades erupted in fiery bursts, taking out Krylan squads hiding behind debris, while sniper shots from hidden positions dropped key Krylan commanders. The enemy, used to overwhelming their foes with sheer numbers, was now being outflanked and outmaneuvered. Within minutes, the Krylan force that had surrounded the bunker was in disarray, their bodies littering the streets. The survivors inside, hearing the sudden silence outside, cautiously emerged from their hiding places, their eyes wide with disbelief. Valen keyed into his comms once more. "Captain, we've made contact with the resistance. Survivors are ready for extraction." "Good work, Valen," Rook replied. "Extraction teams inbound. Prepare for Phase 2, the Krylan's counterattack." Just as the survivors began to move toward the extraction point, a low, rumbling sound filled the air. Valen's head snapped toward the horizon. More Krylan ships were approaching, reinforcements. Massive war barges lumbered through the smoke, their hulking forms blotting out what little sunlight broke through the haze. Krylan gunships swept over the rooftops, and from the war barges, hordes of Krylan soldiers began to deploy. "They're not giving up without a fight," Reyes muttered over the comms. Valen's mind raced. They had already taken out a substantial portion of the Krylan forces on the ground. But this was something different. This was the Krylan's full retaliation. They couldn't fight them head-on, not in these numbers. "Captain, we've got Krylan war barges on approach," Valen said grimly. "We need air support now." "Hold tight, Valen," Rook replied. "Air support is on its way." The tide turns. High above, the Tempest hovered in Veldar's orbit, its sleek, predatory form bristling with advanced weaponry. As the Krylan reinforcements descended onto the city, the ship's cannons roared to life. Beams of concentrated energy lanced down from the sky, tearing through the Krylan war barges with devastating accuracy. Explosions rocked the city as Krylan ships were torn apart mid-air, their fiery wreckage raining down onto the streets below. Valen and his team pressed the advantage, cutting through the Krylan reinforcements as the Tempest provided cover from above. The ground trembled as another Krylan war barge erupted into flames, its burning hull crashing into the ruined city. The Krylan's overwhelming numbers were no match for the precision of the humans and the firepower of their orbital support. As the last of the Krylan forces retreated in disarray, Valen stood among the wreckage, his breathing heavy but controlled. They had done it. The survivors were safe, and the Krylan invasion had been broken. For now. "Captain," Valen keyed into his comms. "The city is secure." "Good work, Valen," Rook replied. "Get the survivors aboard. We're not done yet." The Krylan warlords, proud and unwavering, had heard whispers of human involvement in the defense of Veldar. To them, it was nothing more than idle chatter, another resistance movement that would crumble beneath their boots. Humans, after all, were resilient, perhaps even annoyingly so, but their military power was far from impressive. The Krylan had conquered far more dangerous foes, species that had command of vast fleets and advanced technologies. The humans were just another obstacle in their path to galactic dominance. At least that was what General Kryl believed. From the command deck of the Krylan flagship, Wrath of Velnar, Kryl sat in his imposing command chair, flanked by his most trusted advisors. His armor, a shimmering black shell that marked him as a Krylan warlord, glinted in the light of the holographic displays surrounding him. His sharp, yellow eyes narrowed as reports came in from the ground, but none contained the information he wanted. Something was wrong. "Where is my report?" Kryl's deep, gravelly voice echoed across the bridge. He looked down at his communications officer, who fidgeted under the general's piercing gaze. "Why haven't we heard back from our forward units?" The officer hesitated. "General, the last known transmission was intercepted near the ruins of the Veldar capital. Since then, there has been no contact." Kryl's face twisted into a snarl, his claws tapping impatiently against the arm of his chair. He had sent wave after wave of reinforcements to the surface. The Krylan should have wiped out all resistance by now. But something he hadn't foreseen, was halting their progress. "They're probably incompetent," one of Kryl's lieutenants scoffed. "Or the survivors are hiding in the ruins like vermin. It's only a matter of time before we flush them out." Kryl wasn't so sure. He knew how Krylan soldiers fought. They were relentless, disciplined, and efficient. A breakdown in communication was a sign of something much more troubling. He clenched his fists, grinding his sharp teeth together. "Sent more ships. I want every corner of that city searched. The humans will not escape." But even as he spoke the words, he felt a growing sense of unease. Captain Rook's counterattack. What Kryl didn't know was that, far above the Krylan invasion force, Captain Rook had already set her plan into motion. From her position aboard the Tempest, Rook had been monitoring the Krylan's movements since the initial landing. She had studied their tactics, analyzed their communication networks, and pinpointed their weaknesses. The Krylan were strong, no doubt, but their arrogance left them vulnerable to one key aspect they overlooked: adaptability. Rook stood in front of the holographic tactical display in the command center of the Tempest. Her sharp eyes tracked the positions of the Krylan ships and ground units. She was a seasoned strategist, and she knew the Krylan were underestimating them. That was their first mistake. "Lieutenant Kimura, what's the status of the disruption?" she asked, her voice steady but focused. "Disruption field is at full capacity, Captain," Kimura replied. "Krylan communication channels are down, and we've hacked into their supply routes. They won't know what hit them." Rook nodded. She had planned for this. The Krylan relied too much on their central command structure. They assumed their superior numbers and brute force would crush any resistance. But Rook wasn't going to fight them head-on like they expected. No, she was going to dismantle their operation piece by piece. "Let's keep them blind," Rook said, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Deploy the countermeasures. I want their supply lines completely cut off. No reinforcements, no supplies." Lieutenant Kimura grinned as she typed commands into her console. "Already done, Captain. The Krylan are about to experience some serious logistical headaches." Rook turned back to the display. The Tempest was not just a warship. It was a technological marvel, equipped with advanced stealth systems and electronic warfare capabilities. While the Krylan forces on the ground were busy searching for survivors, Rook had quietly deployed a series of drones and disruption satellites in Veldar's upper atmosphere. These devices were designed to scramble Krylan communication channels and jam their signals, leaving them effectively blind and deaf. But that wasn't all. Rook had also launched a series of stealth strikes on Krylan supply ships, rerouting their convoys into empty sectors of space. Without supplies or reinforcements, the Krylan ground forces were left vulnerable, their tightly controlled invasion plan unraveling without them even realizing it. "Captain," Kimura called out, "we're picking up increased activity on the Krylan flagship. Looks like they're trying to regroup." Rook smiled faintly. "Good. Let them scramble. The more they panic, the easier it'll be to take them down." The Krylan's growing fear. On the ground, the effects of Rook's counterattack were beginning to show. Krylan soldiers, who had once moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, were now disoriented and frustrated. Their patrols, cut off from Central Command, were operating on outdated information. Supply drops were missing, leaving Krylan troops low on ammunition and resources. At the front lines, confusion reigned. Krylan soldiers stumbled through the ruins, their movements erratic as they struggled to understand why their orders weren't coming through. Their once seamless operations were now in chaos, and their frustration turned into rage. General Krylan, however, was not one to be easily rattled, but even he couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that something was terribly wrong. "General, our forces are reporting significant supply shortages on the ground," one of his aides informed him. "They're encountering stiff resistance from human strike teams. We've lost contact with several key battalions." Krylan's claws dug into the armrests of his command chair. "How is this possible? We outnumber them 10-1. "It's the humans," the aide replied nervously. "They're not fighting like we expected. They're using unconventional tactics. They've sabotaged our supply lines and jammed our communications." Krylan's eyes narrowed dangerously. The humans had played him. They had let him believe that this would be a simple conquest, and now they were turning his own arrogance against him. He slammed his fist into the console in front of them, the holographic displays flickering in response. "They've been toying with us from the start," Krylan growled. "But no more. Prepare the fleet for full orbital bombardment. If we can't control the ground, we'll reduce it to ash." His warlords exchanged uneasy glances. Orbital bombardment was a drastic measure, one that would annihilate not only the resistance, but the entire city of Veldar. But Krylan didn't care. His pride had been wounded, and he would rather see the city burn than admit defeat. The humans strike back. Back aboard the Tempest, Rook's sensors picked up the Krylan fleet moving into bombardment position. She knew what Krylan was planning, total annihilation of the city. But Rook had anticipated this move. She activated her comms, her voice calm but firm. "Valen, the Krylan are preparing for orbital bombardment. You need to get the survivors out now." Valen's voice crackled over the comms. "We're already en route to the extraction point." but we've got Krylan troops closing in on us from all sides. It's going to be tight." "Don't worry," Rook replied, a determined edge to her voice. "We've got you covered." She turned to her tactical officer. "Engage Phase 2. Let's give the Krylan something else to worry about." From the Tempest, a series of missiles streaked down toward the Krylan fleet. But these weren't ordinary missiles. They were equipped with specialized electronic warfare payloads designed to disrupt the Krylan's targeting systems. As they detonated in the upper atmosphere, the Krylan fleet's targeting computers went haywire, their weapon systems blinking out of control. Krylan watched in disbelief as his fleet's bombardment plan disintegrated before his eyes. The Krylan ships, unable to lock onto the planet below, fired wildly into space, their precision gone. Rook smiled. That should keep them busy. As the Krylan fleet floundered, Valen and his team reached the extraction point, guiding the survivors toward the waiting dropships. The battle wasn't over yet, but the humans had already turned the tide. Krylan, still seething with rage, stared at the tactical readout on his screen. The humans had outmaneuvered him at every turn, and now his fleet was in disarray. "This isn't over," Krylan snarled. But even as he spoke, he knew the Krylan had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity. As the last of the survivors were evacuated, the Krylan forces began to close in on the human operatives. Valen knew it was time for the final confrontation. He gathered his team and prepared for what they all knew would be their hardest battle yet. The Krylan came in waves, a never-ending sea of warriors, but the humans held their ground. With every blow, every shot fired, they proved what had been whispered in the darkest corners of the galaxy. Humans were not to be underestimated. Valen, at the forefront, fought with a calm precision that left the Krylan stunned. His team followed his lead, each of them moving with lethal efficiency. For every human that fell, 10 Krylan went down. Their Deadliest had answered the call, and they would not be denied victory. Captain Rook stood at the bridge of the Tempest, watching the Krylan fleet scatter and retreat into the dark expanse of space. What had begun as an overwhelming invasion, seemingly destined to crush the defenders of Veldar, had been reduced to a desperate flight for survival. The Krylan, who prided themselves on dominance and brute force, had crumbled under the weight of human resilience, intelligence, and their refusal to yield. The Tempest was quiet, save for the hum of the ship's systems. The crew had been through hell and back, but they had done what few believed possible. They had faced one of the deadliest threats in the galaxy and sent them running. Rook, however, didn't revel in the victory just yet. She knew the cost of this war wasn't measured in destroyed ships or defeated enemies. It was in the lives lost, the scars left behind, and the endless battles still to come. Rice, her second in command, broke the silence. "The Krylan, they'll think twice before challenging us again." There was a hint of pride in his voice, but also a touch of exhaustion. Rook's lips curved into a slight smile. "Let's hope they remember this day. They've learned what humans are capable of when pushed to the edge." She paused, her eyes still focused on the distant stars. "But if they forget, we'll be ready." As the Krylan fleet disappeared into warp space, the bridge crew let out a collective breath. The weight of the moment was beginning to settle in. They had done it. They had saved Veldar from certain destruction, but more importantly, they had sent a message across the galaxy. Humanity was no longer just a name whispered in dark corners. They were a force that even the mightiest empires would have to reckon with. Rook turned to the main console, her fingers tapping across the controls as she pulled up a tactical readout of the system. The surface of Veldar was still smoldering, its once towering skyscrapers reduced to rubble, but there were signs of life. The survivors they had fought so hard to protect were emerging from their bunkers and underground shelters. They would rebuild, stronger and more unified than before. "Captain, transmission coming in from Veldar's resistance leader," Lieutenant Kimura said, her fingers gliding across the comms panel. "Put it through," Rook replied. The holographic display flickered, and a figure appeared. A grizzled man with tired eyes, but an unbroken spirit. His face was smeared with dirt, but there was a fire in his gaze that hadn't been there before. "Captain Rook," he said, his voice crackling through the comms. "We owe you everything." The people of Veldar will never forget what you've done for us. We thought we were finished." Rook shook her head. "You're not finished. This is just the beginning. Veldar will rise again, stronger than before. But the real credit goes to the people who fought on the ground, the survivors who never gave up." The resistance leader nodded, his expression solemn. "Still, without you, without the humans who answered the call, we wouldn't have stood a chance. You've changed the course of this war." Rook's gaze hardened. "We don't fight for glory or recognition. We fight because we have to. And the Krylan, they won't stop here. This war isn't over. We bought you time, but you need to be ready for when they return." "We will be," the leader said, determination evident in his voice. "With allies like you, we stand a chance." The transmission ended, and Rook leaned back in her command chair, exhaling slowly. She knew this victory was only a temporary reprieve. The Krylan wouldn't forget the sting of defeat. They would regroup, rebuild, and return with a vengeance. But humanity was ready for whatever came next. Reyes turned in his seat, glancing back at Rook. "What's next, Captain?" "Head back to Earth for debrief." Rook considered it for a moment, then shook her head. "No, we're not done yet. The Krylan may have retreated, but they're still out there, licking their wounds. If we let them regroup, they'll be twice as dangerous. I want recon teams deployed. We need to know where they're heading and what their next move is." Reyes grinned, still keeping the pressure on her. Rook smiled faintly. "Always." She rose from her chair, walking toward the viewport at the front of the bridge. The vastness of space stretched out before her, endless, mysterious, and full of both danger and opportunity. The stars glittered like shards of glass, and somewhere out there, in the cold reaches of the galaxy, the Krylan would be plotting their next strike. But humanity had proven something today. They weren't just survivors. They were fighters, and they would not back down. The crew of the Tempest moved into action, already preparing for the next mission. The adrenaline of battle was still coursing through them, but the resolve in their hearts was stronger than ever. They had faced the Krylan and won, but there were more battles ahead, more planets to protect, and more enemies to defeat. As the Tempest turned toward its next destination, disappearing into the warp, a message echoed across the galaxy. A warning. Humanity had answered the call for help, and they were the deadliest force the galaxy had ever seen. Back on Veldar, the survivors watched the Tempest vanish into the stars. They had witnessed a miracle, one that would be told for generations. The humans, the deadliest warriors in the galaxy, had come to their rescue. They would rebuild their world, but they would also prepare, for the Krylan were not the only threat lurking in the dark corners of the universe. But now they had hope, and they had allies. The galaxy was forever changed, and the name of humanity would be spoken with both fear and respect.